There is a kind of quiet that a palace keeps the way a lake keeps its depth smooth on the surface, and you learn nothing from the smoothness. I have stood inside that quiet for 31 years, and I will tell you the truest thing I know about it. The danger never announces itself. It arrives dressed as a courtesy. It carries a tray, or a folder, or a friendly little device that fits inside a palm, and it smiles at you on its way past your post, and it is already halfway to the heart of the house before anyone thinks to ask what it wants. My name is Sergeant Dunmore Hale, and in the winter I am telling you about I was the senior guardsman of the East Watch in the Royal House of Harrowgate, which meant I was the man who trained the young ones and stood behind them when they stood their first true tests. The young one this story belongs to was a guardsman named Corwin Vale, 26 years old, 3 years off the drill yard, with a spine like a mast and a habit of noticing things that other men walked past. I want you to remember that habit, because it is the whole of him, and because it is the thing that saved the crown prince from a slow and quiet ruin that no army could have stopped. But it was not Corwin who noticed it first, it was a child. She was 9 years old, the Princess Malin, the middle grandchild of King Alaric, daughter of the Princess Alara, niece of the Crown Prince Rowan. She had her mother's gray eyes and her late grandmother's stubborn chin, and she had a way of standing very still in doorways that unsettled the adults who lived by hurrying. Malin did not hurry. Malin watched. And on the afternoon this began, she watched a man do a small thing near a door that he had no reason to be near, and she filed it away behind those gray eyes, and she said nothing, and she waited. That was the beginning. A 9-year-old girl in the west corridor of the Harrowgate Palace, holding a book she was not reading, watching an aide named Peveril Sconce stand in the wrong place with his hand near his coat. Let me set the ground under you, because the ground matters. The Crown Prince Rowan was 34 that winter, and he was tired in a way that the household had begun to whisper about. He was the king's only son, the heir, the man the whole edifice of Harrowgate leaned toward, and he had spent the autumn in a long, grinding negotiation over the future of the northern estates, a dull, enormous matter of land and water rights and the livelihoods of 10,000 tenant families, the kind of thing that fills no ballads and decides everything. The negotiation was delicate. Rowan conducted much of it himself, by telephone, from a small study on the west side of the palace that had been his mother's music room when the late Queen Isolde was alive. He liked that room. He said the light in it was honest. He took his private calls there because it was the one place in the palace where he could close a door and be, for an hour, only a man solving a problem, and not the future of a kingdom being watched by 400 pairs of eyes. 400 pairs of eyes, remember that too. In a palace you are never alone, you only think you are. Now the Queen Consort. I will speak of her carefully, because I am a soldier and not a storyteller, and because what I believe about her and what I could have proven at the start of that winter were two different lengths of rope. Her name was Morwenna, and she was King Alaric's second wife, married to him some 11 years after the late Queen Isolde died. She was clever, and she was charming when charm was useful to her, and she had a son of her own from before the marriage, Lord Cassius, and a daughter, Lady Verena, and around those two she had built quietly over 11 years a small weather system of loyal people, aides, under-stewards, a private secretary or two, people who owed their place at Harrowgate to her word and knew it. None of this was against any law. A queen consort is entitled to her household. But a household is a tool, and I had watched Morwenna sharpen hers for a decade, and I did not like the edge it was taking on. She had no love for the crown prince. This was known the way weather is known, not written anywhere, simply felt on the skin. Rowan was Isolde's son. He was the living proof that the king had loved a woman before Morwenna, and had a whole life and a whole heir before her, and every honor that came to Rowan was, in some private arithmetic she kept, an honor subtracted from her own son Cassius, who would never wear the crown while Rowan drew breath. I do not say she wished Rowan dead. I say she wished him diminished. I say she wished the household to look at him and see a man who was not quite fit, not quite steady, not quite trustworthy, a little unsound. And I came to understand that winter that she had found a way to manufacture exactly that impression out of nothing, out of thin air and cleverness, and a device that fit inside a coat pocket. That is what the aide by the door was doing, but we did not know it yet. On the afternoon it began. All we had was a 9-year-old girl who thought a man was standing in the wrong place. Malin came to find Corwin because Corwin was the guard she trusted. She had decided this on her own, in the way children decide such things, by some private accounting of who had ever spoken to her like a person. Corwin had. Once, months before, she had dropped a paper boat into the fountain in the East Court, and it had sailed under the ledge where she could not reach it. And Corwin, on duty, which meant he was not supposed to move, not for a boat, not for anything short of the house catching fire, had waited until the changing of the watch. And then in the 90 seconds when his post was properly relieved, and he was technically a free man walking off duty, he had knelt at the fountain and fished out the sodden little boat and set it, dripping, on the ledge where she would find it. He had not made a show of it. He had not told her he'd done it. She had simply come back and found her boat rescued, and she had looked at the guard standing his post again like a statue, and she had understood. Children understand more than we credit. She had decided, on the strength of one paper boat, that Corwin Vale was a man who could be told things. So she told him. It was near the end of his watch in the west corridor, and she came and stood beside him. Not in front. She knew better than to stand in front of a guard on duty, and she looked straight ahead as he did, and she spoke without moving her mouth very much, the way she'd seen him and the other guards do it. "There's a man who keeps standing by Uncle Rowan's door," she said. "When Uncle Rowan is on the telephone, he stands very close to the door and he holds his coat like this." And she made a small gesture, her hand flat against her own chest, as if pressing something to keep it still. "And when Uncle Rowan comes out, the man is always somewhere else. He is fast, but I saw him 3 times now." Corwin did not move. He had been trained, as I trained him, to receive information without giving any back, and he received this the way a wall receives rain. But I was 10 feet down the corridor, at my own station, and I had known the boy 3 years, and I saw the small change in him, the almost invisible settling of a man who has just been handed something heavy and has decided to carry it properly. "Which door, Princess?" he said very low, his eyes forward, his lips barely moving. "The music room," she said. "Grandmother's music room, where Uncle Rowan does his talking." "And the man, do you know his name?" "Mr. Sconce," she said, "Peveril Sconce. He works for the Queen." A pause. Then, with the terrible directness of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned to soften her observations for adult comfort, "I don't think he likes me watching him. Yesterday he told me little girls should be in the schoolroom, not the corridors. He smiled when he said it, but it wasn't a nice smile." That was the moment, if you want to know where it turned. Not the recording, not the phone. That small, ugly sentence, a grown man in the pay of the Queen Consort telling a 9-year-old to get back to the schoolroom because she was watching him. Because a man who tells a child to stop looking is a man who has understood correctly that the child is the only person in the palace who is actually looking. Corwin understood it too. I watched him understand it. "Thank you, Princess," he said. "You did right to tell me. Now I need you to do something for me, and it's the hardest thing, so I'm only asking because I already know you can do it." He waited until she gave the smallest nod. "I need you to stop watching Mr. Sconce, completely. Look bored when he's near. Look at your book. Let him think you forgot about him. Can you do that?" Her chin came up, Isolde's chin, that stubborn chin. "You want me to pretend?" "I want you to be so good at pretending that a clever man believes you." He let one corner of his mouth move, the barest ghost of it still facing forward. "Same as a guard pretends he's a statue. It's not lying, Princess. It's guarding. You're guarding your uncle now, same as I am." and a guard never lets the other fellow see him watching. I will tell you plainly, I have heard officers give worse instructions to grown soldiers. He had taken a frightened, sharp-eyed little girl and in 30 seconds turned her fear into a job with rules she could follow that made her safer and calmer instead of more afraid. That is a gift, that instinct, and you cannot train it into a man. He either has it or he does not. Corwin had it. Malin considered the assignment with great seriousness. Then she said, "All right. I'll be a statue." And she walked away down the corridor, swinging her book, humming something tuneless, the very picture of a child who has forgotten everything she ever noticed. And she did not once look back at the music room door, and I thought, watching her go, that the queen consort had made a grave miscalculation somewhere in her long, clever winter, because whatever she thought she was not fighting only grown men. She was fighting that. When the watch changed and Corwin came off post, he came to me. Of course he did. I was his sergeant. You do not sit on a thing like this alone at 26. You bring it up the chain, and the chain begins with the man who trained you. "Sergeant," he said in the guardroom with the door shut, "the Princess Malin says a queen's aide has been standing at the Crown Prince's study door during his private calls, holding something against his chest under his coat, 3 times, and the aide has told her to stop watching him." I set down the mug of tea I was holding. I set it down slowly, because a man learns to make slow movements when his heart has just sped up, so that no one reads the speed off him. "Sconce," I said. "You know him." "I know whose man he is." I looked at the boy. "Corwin, think about what you're saying before you say it further. A queen's aide near a door is not a crime. A man holding his coat is not a crime. And a 9-year-old's word against a grown official of the consort's household is a thing that will not survive 1 hour in front of the Lord Chamberlain. If you carry this up the chain the way you've just told it to me, you will not stop Sconce. You will end yourself. They will call it a child's fancy and a guardsman's overreach, and by supper you'll be posted to a gate in the far north where the only thing you'll ever guard again is sheep." He took that. He was not a fool, and he did not flinch from hard truth. That was another thing I'd trained or maybe just found already in him. "Then what," he said, "is not a crime yet? What do I do about the thing that's still just a shape under a coat?" And there it is. That is the whole engine of what a good guard is, not the man who reacts to the crime. The man who sees the shape of the crime while it is still only a shape, and who is patient enough and disciplined enough to let it become real in the open, where the law can finally see it too. "You watch," I told him. "You say nothing. You change your rotation so you're on the west corridor when the Crown Prince takes his calls, and you make yourself so ordinary a fixture that a clever man stops seeing you. And you find out before you ever accuse a soul exactly what is under that coat. Because if you're right, if that man is putting a recorder against a door while the heir of Harrowgate negotiates the future of 10,000 families, then the shape under the coat is not the crime, lad. The crime is what they mean to do with what it hears, and we don't know that yet. So we watch." He nodded once the way he did. And that night, for the first time, I lay awake in my quarters and turned over in the dark the question that would run under the whole of that winter like a cold stream under ice. Not what is on the recordings, but who are they for, and what will they be twisted into, and how far up does the coat go? I did not yet know the answer, but I knew the shape of it, and I knew that a 9-year-old girl with gray eyes had seen it first, when 400 grown and clever people had walked past it every single day and called the surface smooth. For 11 days, Corwin Vale did nothing but watch, and doing nothing is the hardest work a guard ever does. I arranged the rotations myself, quietly, the way a sergeant can arrange a great many things if he is careful and no one asks. I put Corwin on the west corridor for the hours when the Crown Prince most often took his calls, the late mornings, when the North Estate's men were at their desks and the telephone in the old music room rang and rang. And I taught him again, though he did not need much teaching, the discipline of the invisible watch, to look at everything and appear to look at nothing, to let his eyes rest 3 feet to the side of the thing he was truly measuring, to breathe slow so his stillness never had the taut quality of a man about to move. A guard who is watching hard looks different from a guard who is merely standing. If you know how to read it, the jaw sets, the weight comes forward onto the balls of the feet. Corwin learned to watch without any of that. He learned to be furniture with a pulse. And what he saw, over those 11 days, built itself into a pattern as clean and damning as a ledger. Peveril Sconce was not a careless man. That was the first thing and the worst. If he had been careless, we would have had him inside a week, and it would have been a small, ugly matter quietly closed. But Sconce was patient and he was practiced, and the practice was the tell, because a man does not become practiced at standing near a door with something pressed to his chest, unless he has done it many times in many places, and has been rewarded for it. He came to the West Corridor only when the Crown Prince's telephone was in use. He never lingered when the study was empty. He knew the call was happening before the corridor did, which meant, and Corwin marked this and brought it to me, and I felt the cold stream widen under the ice, that someone was telling him. Someone with sight of the Crown Prince's schedule. Someone inside. Sconce's method was almost elegant. He would arrive with a reason, a folder to deliver to a steward 2 doors down, a message for the equerry, a plausible errand that put him lawfully in the corridor. He would pause outside the music room as if reading a note, or straightening a picture on the wall, or simply waiting for someone. And in that pause his right hand would go inside his coat and rest flat against his chest, over the breast, and stay there still for the length of the pause. Then the errand would carry him onward and he would be gone before the study door opened. 3, 4 minutes at the door, never longer. Never twice in the same guise. A folder one day, a straightened picture the next, a paused conversation with a passing maid the day after that. It's a recorder, Corwin told me on the 6th day in the guardroom low. It has to be. Something small enough to sit flat against his chest under a good coat, and sensitive enough to take a voice through a door. And he's not recording it for the sound of the Crown Prince's voice, Sergeant. He's recording the North Estate's negotiation. Word by word, every private thing the Crown Prince says to the men across the table when he thinks the door is shut. To what end, I said, though I was beginning to guess. I don't know yet, but think what a man could do with it. The Crown Prince speaks freely on those calls. He told me once offhand that the whole point of the room is that he can think aloud in it, try positions he'd never say in council, argue against himself. If someone had his private words, the ones where he plays the devil's advocate, the ones where he says a hard thing to test it, they could cut them out of the argument they belong to and hang them up alone. The Crown Prince said he'd let the northern tenants fend for themselves. The Crown Prince called the estate men a burden. He never said any such thing, not as a settled view, but he might have said the words once in a room where he was allowed to be wrong out loud. And words don't carry their room with them. A recording carries only the words. I sat with that. It was, I realized, the most dangerous kind of lie there is, not a fabrication, but a truth with its ribs broken and reset crooked. You cannot disprove a recording of a man's own voice. You can only try to explain the room it came from, and by the time you're explaining, you've already lost, because the damage was done in the first 10 seconds of the listening. Who benefits? I said. It is the oldest question and the only one that ever matters. The Crown Prince has no rival but one, Corwin said quietly. There's only one person in this house who gains if the heir is made to look reckless, or cruel, or unfit. Only one person whose son stands next in the line the moment the king's confidence in Rowan cracks. Neither of us said her name in the guardroom. We did not need to. It hung in the air between us, and we both looked at it, and then we looked away from it, because to say it aloud without proof was to load a weapon and point it at ourselves. Proof, I said. Not the shape of it, the thing itself. I want the device in a hand where the whole house can see it, and I want it in a moment that cannot be explained away as a child's fancy or a guardsman's grudge. Do you understand me, Corwin? If we move too soon, we lose everything and we take the Princess Malin down with us, because the first thing they'll do is say a little girl started a slander, and they'll make her the villain of it, a strange, watchful child who tells tales. We are not going to let that happen. So we do not move until we cannot lose." He looked at me for a long moment. And the Crown Prince, he's speaking freely into that room every day, not knowing every word is being carried off. Every day we wait, they gather more. "I know it," I said. "And it is the hardest part, and it is the right thing. If we warn him now, he changes his manner, he stops taking the calls in that room, and Sconce simply vanishes back into the consort's household with everything he's already taken, and we never catch the hand behind him. We'd save the Crown Prince 1 week of exposure and lose the whole war. No. We watch until we can take the device, the man, and the trail behind the man, all in one motion. That's the only ending that ends it." It was the correct judgment. I have gone back over it 100 times in the years since, and I would make it again. But I will not pretend it sat easily. There is a particular weight to knowing a wrong is happening, watching it happen day after day, choosing not to stop it yet, because stopping it wrong would let the true wrong escape. That weight is what the badge costs. Corwin carried it 11 days, and he did not once let it show on his face, and if you had passed him in that corridor you would have seen only a young guardsman standing his post, immaculate, unremarkable, a fixture, furniture with a pulse. Meanwhile, the Princess Malin played her part like a born campaigner. She was, God help us, magnificent at it. She had taken Corwin's instruction, be so good at pretending that a clever man believes you, and she had made it a game she was determined to win. When Sconce passed her in the corridor, she yawned. She looked at her book. Once when he came near while she was drawing at a window seat, she held up her drawing to him, unbidden, and asked in a bored, babyish voice whether he thought it needed more sky, and Sconce. I heard this from Corwin, who nearly lost his statue's composure recounting it. Sconce had looked at the drawing of a lopsided horse, and told her curtly it needed nothing, and gone on his way visibly relieved, having concluded that the watchful child had been a passing fancy, and was now safely returned to horses and sky. He struck her off his list of concerns. He decided she was harmless. She was not harmless, she was gathering, because Malin had not in fact stopped watching. She had only stopped watching where Sconce could see her watching, which is a different and far more dangerous thing. From the window seats, from behind her raised drawing board, from the top of the great stair where a small figure could sit unnoticed among the banisters, she went on marking the times he came, and the times he went, and the errands he wore as costumes. And she reported it all to Corwin at the changing of the watch, in her flat statue voice, without moving her mouth. She was, in every way that mattered, the best-placed watcher in the palace, invisible because underestimated, trusted with the run of the corridors because she was the king's grandchild, and sharper than any of the adults who dismissed her. Corwin had 2 eyes on the west corridor. Through Malin he had a dozen more, all over the house, and none of them showed. I think about that a great deal. Morwenna had built her weather system of grown, paid, ambitious people, and she thought that made her strong. And against it stood a 9-year-old with a drawing of a lopsided horse, who had decided she was a guard now, and who missed nothing. The consort never once suspected that the smallest person in the palace had become its sharpest sentry. It is the oldest lesson in my trade, and she never learned it. The one you do not think worth watching is exactly the one who is watching you. On the 11th day, the pattern broke, and it broke because the stakes on the North Estates negotiation broke first. I should explain what that negotiation had become, because the timing of what followed was not chance. The whole northern matter had come to its hinge. After a long autumn of grinding, the men across the table, a syndicate of estate managers and their lawyers, hard, practical people with 10,000 tenant families behind them, had put a final proposal to the crown, and the crown prince had until the end of that week to answer it. If he answered well, The tenants would keep their water and their tenancies for another generation, and Rowan would be remembered by 10,000 families as the heir who had stood for them. If he answered badly, or if he were made to appear to have answered badly, to have shown contempt for those families in private while smiling at them in public, the northern estates would turn against the crown, and the man who had lost them would be marked forever as an heir who could not be trusted with the realm's most delicate business. You see the shape of it now. Whoever held recordings of Rowan's private, thinking aloud, arguing with himself calls held the power to release, at exactly the right moment, a fragment that made the heir sound like a man who despised the very families he was publicly defending. Not a lie, his own voice, his own words, cut from the room that made sense of them. Released to the northern managers, or to the council, or simply whispered into the king's ear by a trusted wife who had heard, she would say, a most distressing thing about his son. The timing that Sconce had been building toward all winter was this week. This call, the one where the crown prince, alone in his mother's music room with the door shut, would think aloud about the hardest men at the table and say, somewhere in the arguing, a sentence that could be lifted out and hung up alone to hang him. Corwin knew the negotiation was at its hinge. I had made sure he knew. And so on the 11th day, when the crown prince went into the music room at 10:30 in the morning and closed the door, and the corridor went quiet with the particular quiet of a man about to speak freely into a telephone, Corwin was already at his post, and he was ready, and I was 3 doors down with 2 more guardsmen of my own choosing arranged on plausible errands, and the trap that had taken 11 days to lay was finally, silently, set. And the Princess Maelin was at the top of the great stair, among the banisters, with her drawing board and her lopsided horse, watching. Sconce came at 20 to 11. He came the way he always came, with a costume, a slim leather folder held to his chest, a man on an errand to the steward's office. He moved without hurry down the west corridor, and Corwin, at his post, let his eyes rest 3 feet to the side of him and breath slow and was furniture. Sconce paused outside the music room door. He shifted the folder to his left hand, and his right hand went inside his coat, flat against his chest, over the breast, and stayed there, and this once, because the negotiation was at its hinge, and he wanted the best possible take of the most important call of the winter, he leaned. He leaned his shoulder and the side of his head, just slightly, toward the door, closing the last few inches between the device on his chest and the voice on the other side of the wood. It was the smallest greed. It was the 1 extra inch that a patient man allows himself when the prize is finally in reach, and it was enough. Because from the top of the great stair, Maelin saw the lean. She had seen him stand at that door a dozen times, and every time his hand had gone to his chest, and every time she had wondered what it meant, but she had never before seen him lean, never seen him press himself toward the door like a man drinking through a keyhole. And in that moment the meaning arrived in her whole at once, the way meaning arrives in the sharp young before the slow old have finished reasoning toward it. He is stealing Uncle Rowan's words. That thing under his coat is stealing them right now. And Maelin, who had been told, and had faithfully obeyed, to watch and never be seen watching, to gather and never move, did a thing that no discipline of Corwin's could have prevented, because she was 9 years old and it was her uncle, and the theft was happening in front of her eyes at this exact instant, and the whole careful 11-day patience of the grown men below meant nothing to a child's certainty that a bad thing must be stopped now. She stood up. Her drawing board clattered down the stairs, and in a voice that rang the whole length of the west corridor, high and clear and utterly without fear, the Princess Maelin cried out, "That man is stealing Uncle Rowan's words. He's got a machine. Look under his coat. Look." Everything happened in the next 4 seconds, and I have slowed those 4 seconds down in my memory 10,000 times, and I will lay them out for you the way they fell. Sconce's face, I saw it. I had a clean line to it. Sconce's face did the thing that guilt does when it is caught in the open with no story ready. It went slack, and then it went white, and then it went to the door and the stair and the corridor all at once, looking for the exit that a caught man always looks for and never finds. His hand came out of his coat, and in the coming out it revealed, for half a second before he could clutch it back, the flat dark shape of the device that had been pressed to his chest. A slim recorder, black, its small red eye of a light burning, the little light that meant it was running, that meant it was recording, that meant every word the Crown Prince had spoken into that telephone for the last quarter of an hour was already captured on it, and belonged now to whoever Sconce carried it to. And Sconce made his choice, the only choice a cornered man of his kind makes. He ran. He turned to bolt down the corridor with the device in his fist, to get it out of the house, to get it to the hand it was meant for, because the words on it were worth everything, and he knew, in the white slack panic of his face, that if he lost the device he lost his patron and his place and his freedom altogether. He got one stride. Corwin Vale had been furniture with a pulse for 11 days, and in the 11th day, in the 4 seconds when the shape under the coat became the crime in the open at last, the furniture moved. He did not draw a weapon. There was no weapon to draw against a fleeing Aide, and a guardsman who bloodied a man in that corridor would have handed the consort her defense on a plate. He moved the way I had trained him and the way he was built, fast and precise and proportionate, and he put himself between Peveril Sconce and the length of open corridor Sconce was running for, one long stride and a turn of the shoulder, and Sconce ran full into the wall of him and rebounded. And the device came free of Sconce's fist in the collision, spinning up into the air between them, its little red light still burning, turning over once in the honest light of the west corridor. And Corwin took it out of the air. Not to keep it, not to pocket it, not to carry it up the chain and let it become a thing that could be denied and doctored and lost in a steward's drawer for a fortnight, while the consort's people quietly made it vanish. He took it out of the air, and in the same motion, with the whole household spilling now into the corridor, a maid, the equerry, my 2 guardsmen closing from their errands, the study door flying open and the Crown Prince himself standing in it with the telephone still in his hand and astonishment on his face, with all of them as his witnesses, in the full and public light where nothing could ever afterward be called a child's fancy or a guardsman's grudge. Corwin Vale raised the recorder over his head and brought it down against the stone floor of the west corridor with every honest ounce of his strength. It did not survive. It burst, casing and glass and the small hungry mechanism of it, across the flagstones, the little red light going dark in the instant of the impact, the stolen words scattering with the shards into nothing. He struck it once more, deliberate, grinding the pieces under his heel, and then he stood up over the ruin of it with his chest heaving and his eyes forward and every soul in that corridor staring at him, and he said the only thing he said in the whole of it, quiet, addressed to no one and to all of them. That machine does not leave this house with the Crown Prince's words inside it, not while I stand this post. I have been asked in the years since why he smashed it, why not seize it as evidence, why destroy the very proof of the crime? And I have answered every time the same way, because it is the thing that separates a guard from a policeman, and it is the thing that made me proudest of the boy I trained. Corwin did not smash it out of anger. He smashed it because he understood in that 4-second instant what the device was and what it was for. It was not evidence of a past crime. It was a live weapon aimed at the Crown Prince, loaded that very minute with words that could be released at any hour to ruin an innocent man. And the moment it was captured, the only question that mattered was who would hold it next. If it went up the chain intact, it went into the machinery of the household, and the household had a hole in it, an informer, a hand that told Sconce when the Crown Prince's calls began, and Corwin did not know how many hands. He did not know how far the coat went. He knew only that a loaded weapon must be disarmed before it is examined, and that the surest way to make certain the stolen words never harmed the Crown Prince was to see, with his own eyes, in front of 40 witnesses, those words destroyed beyond any recovery. The proof of the scheme did not live in the device. The proof lived in the man standing over its ruin, and in the aide caught fleeing, and in the child at the top of the stair, and in the whole household that had watched it happen. That proof no one could smash. The crown prince stood in the doorway of his mother's music room and looked at the shattered thing on the floor, and at the guardsman standing over it, and at the aide of his stepmother's household being taken by the arms now by my 2 men, and at the small figure hurrying down the great stair toward them all, his niece, Malin, her drawing board forgotten, her face bright and fierce and frightened all at once. "Corwin," the crown prince said slowly, "what is this?" And Corwin Vale, breathing hard, his post held, his duty done, looked at the heir of Harrowgate and answered him with the plain truth. "This, your highness, is a man who has been stealing your private words for the whole of the winter, and the Princess Malin is the one who caught him. All I did was break the thing he stole them with before it could leave the house. The rest of it, where the words were going, and who was waiting for them, I think your highness had better ask the man himself, while we still have him. Now hear how quickly a palace closes ranks around its own rot, and how nearly the whole of it slipped away in the first hour, and understand that catching the thief is never the hard part. Catching the hand behind the thief, that is the winter's true work, and it does not yield to a smashed device and a caught aide. It yields to nothing but patience and proof, and there was a stretch, that same afternoon, when I believed we had lost it. They took Sconce to a small windowless room off the steward's hall, and the crown prince sent for the man who should have handled such a matter, the controller of the household, a careful gray official named Lord Cassius, and here I must be exact, because the name will mislead you if I am not. This Lord Cassius was the queen consort's own son, Morwenna's son, the very man whose path to the crown ran clear the day his stepbrother Rowan was made to look unfit. And the household, moving by its own old machinery, had just delivered the investigation of a crime against the crown prince into the hands of the one man in the palace who stood to gain the most from that crime succeeding. I want you to sit inside that with me for a moment, because it is the coldest thing in this whole account. It was not a plot that Cassius should be the one to question Sconce. It was simply how the house worked. The controller handled household discipline. Sconce was a household aide. Therefore Sconce went to the controller. The machinery of a great house has no morality. It only has procedure, and procedure had just handed the fox the key to the henhouse and called it good order. Lord Cassius arrived within the half hour, grave and unhurried, and he questioned Peveril Sconce behind a closed door for exactly 11 minutes, and he emerged with a face composed into the particular sorrow of a man delivering an awkward truth, and he gave his account to the crown prince in the corridor outside, and I stood at my post and heard every word. "Wretched business, your highness," Lord Cassius said, "and I am relieved it was caught, but I fear it is smaller and sadder than the alarm suggests. Sconce confesses the device is his own. He says, and he is contrite, he weeps, that he had lately fallen into debt, and that a man he will not name approached him with money to record any crown matters he could reach, to sell to the estate managers ahead of the northern settlement. A grubby little scheme for profit. He acted alone for money, and he is ashamed. He names no one within the house because there is no one within the house to name. I would recommend he be dismissed at once and handed to the magistrates, and the household spared any wider suspicion. To go hunting for a great conspiracy where there is only a poor man's greed would only wound innocent servants and unsettle the whole staff for nothing. It was beautifully done. I will grant Morwenna's son that it was a masterwork of the kind. Every part of it was designed to close the matter that same hour. A confession, so no further questioning was needed. A lone culprit, so no one else could be pursued. An outside buyer he could not name, so the trail ran off the edge of the household into the anonymous world and vanished. And a warning, wrapped in concern, that anyone who kept digging would be the villain, a man wounding innocent servants and unsettling the staff for nothing. He had built a wall in 11 minutes, and he had built it out of Sconce's own mouth, and behind that wall, if it held, Morwenna would never so much as be looked at. And the Crown Prince very nearly accepted it. Why would he not? He was a decent man, badly shaken, holding a telephone in a corridor while his own household assured him the danger was small and already handled, and that further suspicion would only harm the loyal. Every instinct of a good and trusting man pulled him toward the wall. Close it, dismiss the wretch, be grateful it was caught and move on. I saw him begin to nod. I saw the relief start to come into his shoulders. And I felt the whole winter tilting toward being lost, and I could do nothing about it, because a sergeant of the East Watch does not contradict the controller of the household in a corridor in front of the heir. I had rank enough to guard the Crown Prince's body. I had no rank at all to tell him his stepbrother was lying to his face. But there were three things in that corridor that Lord Cassius's beautiful wall did not account for, and any one of them alone might have failed, and all three together did not. The first was Corwin Vale, who had stood over the ruin of that device and heard the debt story and did not believe one word of it, and who, bound by rank as I was, unable to accuse, did the one thing a guardsman was permitted to do. He asked a question, not an accusation. A question, respectful, addressed to the Crown Prince, in the plain, flat voice of a man simply seeking to do his duty correctly. Your Highness, forgive me. If the man acted alone for an outside buyer, I only want to understand my own failure so it does not happen again. How did he know when to come? He came only when your private calls were in progress, never when the room was empty. 11 days I watched him, and 11 days he arrived within minutes of the telephone being lifted and left before the door opened. A man selling to outsiders for money could stand at any door and take his chances. This man was told. Every time, by someone with sight of your private schedule. I do not name them, Your Highness, I could not. But a lone thief buying his way in off the street does not have that. Someone inside the house was his eyes. That is the only thing I know for certain, and I would be failing my post if I let it pass unsaid. The corridor went very still. Lord Cassius, to his credit, did not blink. He was too practiced for that. He said smoothly that a bribed servant might well have arranged a signal, some paid pair of eyes below stairs, and that this too could be run down without alarming the whole house. But the thing had been said now, in front of the Crown Prince, by the very guardsman who had caught the crime, a guardsman with no grievance, no ambition, nothing to gain, who had just spent 11 days and one violent public act proving he cared for one thing only, which was the safety of that study door. The Crown Prince's nod had stopped. The relief had gone out of his shoulders. He was listening now, truly listening, and once a good man begins truly to listen, he does not easily stop. The second thing in the corridor that Lord Cassius did not account for was the Princess Malin. She had come down from the stair, and she had stood, unnoticed by the grown men, at the edge of the gathering, holding her recovered drawing board against her chest, listening to all of it with her gray eyes going from face to face. And when the talk turned to how the thief knew when to come, and Lord Cassius spoke smoothly of paid eyes below stairs, Malin, who had been told once, weeks ago, to watch and gather and never be seen, decided that the time for hiding was over, because the man was building a lie and she had the piece that broke it. He wasn't told below stairs, she said. Every head turned. A 9-year-old in a corridor of grave officials, with a drawing board and a lopsided horse. I saw who told him, Malin said, and her voice did not shake, because she had practiced for weeks at being a guard, and a guard's voice does not shake. There's a lady who works for the Queen, Mistress Hollies. She keeps the book, the day book, the one with everyone's appointments in it, in the little green room by the east stair. Twice I saw Mr. Sconce go to her in the mornings before he came to Uncle Rowan's door, and she looked in the green book and she said something to him, and then he came. And once I heard her, she said, the half-hour after 10, he always closes the door. And then Mr. Sconce nodded and went, and it was the half-hour after 10, and Uncle Rowan closed the door. I wrote it down. She turned the drawing board around. On the back of the lopsided horse, in a careful 9-year-old's hand, were dates and times, 11 days of them, and beside 2 of them the words Green Room, Mistress Holly's, the half hour after 10. A child's page, and it was the thread that unraveled the whole coat, because Mistress Holly's, keeper of the household daybook, was not a bribed servant below stairs buying a bit of money. Mistress Holly's was a senior lady of the Queen Consort's own private household, one of Morwenna's own people, placed years ago at the very hinge of the house's information, the daybook through which every private appointment of every royal passed. She was not hired by Sconce. She and Sconce were hired by the same hand. Lord Cassius's beautiful wall had a name written on the back of it now, and the name did not run off the edge of the household into the anonymous street. The name led inward. It led up. It led toward his own mother's rooms, and he knew it, and for the first time that afternoon a flicker of something crossed the controller's gray composed face. Not guilt, I think, but calculation, the swift cold arithmetic of a man realizing his 11-minute wall would not hold, and beginning already to think about which side of it he wished to be standing on when it fell. And the third thing in the corridor that Lord Cassius had not accounted for was that the Crown Prince Rowan, whatever the household whispered about his tiredness and his private doubts, was not a fool and was not a coward, and had just watched a guardsman smash a stolen weapon rather than let his words be carried off, and had just heard his 9-year-old niece produce a written record more careful than his own equerry could have kept. And he made in that corridor the decision that decided everything. "Send for the king," he said. Lord Cassius said, gently, that surely there was no need to trouble his majesty with a household matter that could be. "Send for the king," the Crown Prince said again, and this time there was iron under it, the iron of a tired man who has just discovered exactly how tired he is of being managed. A senior lady of the consort's household directed a hidden recorder onto my private calls for 11 days, timed to the settlement of the northern estates. That is not a household matter, Cassius. That is an attack on the crown, conducted from inside the crown's own walls, and I will not have it closed in a corridor by the man whose family it touches. Send for the king." And Lord Cassius, the fox, handed the key to the henhouse, looked at the Crown Prince and looked at the guardsman and looked at the small girl with the drawing board, and understood that the wall was down, and that the only thing left to decide was whether he went down with it. He sent for the king. King Alaric came within the hour, and the household learned that afternoon a thing it had half forgotten under the long, clever winter, that the old man was still the king, and that the tiredness the whispers had been hanging on his son had never been in the father at all. He came into the west corridor with 2 of his own guards and no ceremony, and he looked at the shattered device on the flagstones, and at the aide held between my men, and at the guardsman standing his post, and at his granddaughter with her drawing board, and he did not sit and he did not send for refreshment. He said, "Tell me, from the beginning, and no one leaves this floor until I have heard it." I will not walk you through the whole of the questioning, for it took the rest of the day, and much of it was slow, careful work of a kind that does not make a story. But I will give you the shape of how the coat came off, thread by thread, because the manner of it matters, because the king did not do it by force or by fury, but by patience, the same patience the guardsman had shown for 11 days, and the 2 men, the old king and the young guard, understood each other on sight for exactly that reason. The king had the Crown Prince tell it first, the private calls, the honest light of the music room, the negotiation at its hinge. Then he had me tell it the 11 days, the pattern, the arranged rotations. Then and only then he turned to the small figure at the edge of the gathering, and he did a thing that I have never forgotten, because it was the whole of his greatness in one motion. He did not talk down to her. He did not pat her head and thank her and send her off to the schoolroom. He drew up a chair, an ordinary chair from against the wall, and he set it in the middle of that grave gathering of officials, and he said, "Princess Maelin, come and sit and tell your grandfather exactly what you saw in your own words, and take all the time you need. You are the most important witness in this house, and I will hear you as I would hear any other." And she climbed up into the chair, her feet not reaching the floor, her drawing board on her knees, and she told him, all of it, the wrong place by the door, the hand at the chest, the lean that morning that told her whole, Mistress Holly's and the green room and the half-hour after 10. She told it plainly and completely, and when she was uncertain she said she was uncertain, and when she was sure she said she was sure, and I have watched grown men give evidence to a king with less clarity and less courage than that 9-year-old showed sitting in a chair too big for her with her feet swinging in the air. When she finished, King Alaric was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, Princess. You have done your house a service that grown men and long service have failed to do. You watched when watching was hard, and you spoke when speaking was frightening, and you did both without being asked and without reward. That is the whole of what honor is. I am prouder of you today than of anyone under this roof." And he stood, and he bowed to her, the king, to a 9-year-old in an oversized chair, a small grave bow, and the corridor went very still around it, and I saw the crown prince turn his face away because he was a grown man, and could not let it be seen how the moment had taken him. Then the king went to work on the coat. He had Mistress Holly's brought up from the green room. She came in composed, a handsome, careful woman of 50, one of Morwenna's in her household these 9 years, and she was ready with her denials. She knew nothing. She kept the day-book as she was ordered. If Sconce had looked at it, that was his affair and none of hers. And she might have held, for she was cleverer than Sconce, except that the king did not accuse her. He simply asked her mildly to confirm the household's own records, who had access to the private day-book, and by whose written authority, and to whom she reported. These were dull administrative facts, matters of paper, and she could not deny them without denying the very records that hung on the wall of the green room in her own hand. And the paper told its own tale, thread by thread, that the private schedule of the crown prince's calls was held in the day-book, that the day-book was kept by Mistress Holly's, that Mistress Holly's reported not to the controller nor to the king's private office, but directly, personally, and solely to the queen consort's household, that she had been placed there, 9 years before, by the queen consort's own hand, over the objection, it turned out, of the old private secretary who had wanted a neutral keeper of the book and had been quietly overruled. None of that was a crime. Every piece of it was ordinary household paper. But laid end to end in front of a patient king, the ordinary paper drew a line, and the line ran from the recorder in Sconce's coat, through the timing that Malin had marked, to the day-book that Holly's kept, to the household of the queen consort, and it did not stop until it reached her door. And that was when Peveril Sconce, who had been sitting silent and gray through the whole afternoon, watching his own patron's wall come down around him, made the calculation that broke the case fully open. The same calculation his own Captain Lord Cassius had made hours before. He looked at the line the king had drawn, and he understood that the wall built to protect Morwenna was going to fall on him alone, that he was to be the lone greedy thief who acted for outside money, dismissed to the magistrates while the household above him closed smooth and clean over the truth, and he decided he would not carry it alone. "I did not act for outside money," Sconce said. His voice was flat and exhausted and past all costume. "There was no debt. There was no buyer from the estates. I was told to do it and paid to do it and told exactly what to gather by the queen consort's household. Mistress Holly's gave me the times. I gave the recordings to Mistress Holly's. Where they went after that I was not told and did not ask, because a man in my place does not ask. But I know who they were for, because I was told what to listen for. I was told to bring back anything, any word, any half-sentence, where the crown prince spoke hard of the northern tenants, or angry of the men at the table, or weary of the whole burden of the crown. Anything that could be made to sound as if the heir despised the very families he was defending. Those were my orders, and they did not come from the estates. They came from within these walls, from the one household in this palace that has never wished the crown prince well. He did not say her name. He did not have to. But the king said it quietly into the stillness, so that it could never afterward be pretended it had gone unsaid. "The queen consort," said King Alaric. And no one in that corridor answered him, and the silence was the answer. I would be lying to you if I said it ended there cleanly with the naming. It did not. There was one more turn to come, and it was the hardest, because a queen consort is not a fleeing aide, and she did not go slack and white and run for a door. She came, when the king sent for her, composed and magnificent and entirely unbroken, and she very nearly turned the whole afternoon over on its head, and the manner in which she failed is the truest measure of everything Corwin and the child had built. Morwenna came into the west corridor, as if she were arriving at a reception she had graciously agreed to attend. She looked at the shattered device, at her caught aide, at her named lady, at the guardsman, at the child, at the king, and she was not afraid, and that was the frightening thing about her. She had been clever for 11 years, and she did not stop being clever now. "I see a broken toy on the floor and a frightened servant who will say anything to save his own skin," she said, and her voice was warm and reasonable, and carried the faint sorrow of a woman obliged to correct a foolish alarm. "Alaric, my love, think. A household aide is caught with a recorder, and to save himself he points at the highest name he can reach, because who would believe a thief over a common steward but who just might doubt a queen? Of course he names me. I am the most valuable name he can throw. And a small girl with a vivid imagination has spun 3 ordinary sights into a tale of intrigue. As children do, she saw a man by a door, she saw a lady with a book, and her clever little mind stitched them into a plot. It is charming. It is not evidence. And your son," she turned to Rowan with a look of exquisite wounded patience, "your son, forgive me, has been under great strain this winter. Everyone has remarked it, and I fear he is too ready to see enemies in the walls. I have kept this household loyal for 11 years. I will not stand in a corridor and be accused of treason on the word of a caught thief and a 9-year-old's drawing. Dismiss the wretch, comfort the child, and let us all go in to dinner." And it was very good. I want you to understand how good it was. She had, in 30 seconds, offered the king the easiest and most comfortable exit from the worst afternoon of his household's life. A way to make the ugliness small and go in to dinner. She had turned Sconce's confession into the desperate lie of a cornered thief, turned Malin's careful record into a child's charming fancy, and turned the crown prince's own composure into evidence of the very instability the whole scheme had been built to manufacture. She had taken every strength of the case against her and rebranded it as a weakness. It was the same move Lord Cassius had made in the first hour, made now by a far greater artist, and it was aimed precisely at a father's love and a king's weariness and a house's longing to have the whole thing simply stop. And for one long moment I saw King Alaric feel the pull of it. He was an old man, and he loved his wife, and no man wishes to believe such a thing of the woman he sleeps beside. I saw him want the exit she offered. I have never in my life watched a harder thing than an old king wanting to believe a comfortable lie. It was Corwin who held the door against it, not with an accusation, which he had no rank to make, but with the one thing he did have the standing to offer, the plain testimony of his own 11 days, spoken to his king as a guardsman is always permitted to speak to his king when asked, and never otherwise. "Your Majesty," Corwin said, "I make no charge against Her Majesty. It is not my place, and I do not know her heart. But I will tell you only what I saw with my own eyes, because that is my duty and the whole of it. For 11 days that man came to your son's door only when the private calls were in progress, and never once when the room was empty. Not once. In 11 days of watching, he was never early and never late and never wrong about the timing, and no thief working off outside money can be right 11 days out of 11. He was told, every single day, by someone who held the private schedule of the heir. That schedule lives in one book. That book is kept by one lady. That lady answers to one household. I do not say what is in anyone's heart, your majesty. I only say what the 11 days showed, and the 11 days show a chain, and I would be false to my post and to you if I let the chain be called a child's fancy, because it was not a child's fancy that I watched for 11 days. It was a scheme, and the child did not imagine it. The child is the only reason you know of it at all. The king looked at him for a long time, and then he did the thing that saved his house, and it was not a grand thing. It was a small procedural thing, which is exactly why it could not be denied. Then we will not argue about hearts, King Alaric said. We will look at the book. He sent for the day book, the actual green ledger from the green room, and he had it opened in front of everyone, in the corridor, in the honest light. And he had Malin's dates read out from the back of her drawing board, and against each one the day book was checked. And against each of those 11 mornings the day book showed, in Mistress Holly's own hand, the entry for the Crown Prince's private call, logged in advance with the time. Every morning the child had marked sconce at the door, the book had recorded the call ahead of it. The child's page and the lady's ledger matched to the half-hour, 11 times out of 11. That was not a 9-year-old's imagination. That was 2 independent records, kept by 2 people who did not know of each other, agreeing perfectly, and there is no imagination in the world that can forge that. It could only mean what it meant, that the private schedule had been used to aim the thief, and that the schedule lived in Morwenna's household, kept by Morwenna's placed woman. And when the 11th entry matched the 11th mark, the corridor was silent, and Morwenna's composure, the great artist's composure that had held through everything, cracked at last along one hairline, just for an instant, a tightening at the mouth. And in that instant every soul in the corridor saw it, and the comfortable exit she had offered the king closed forever, because you cannot go in to dinner after that. She did not confess. She was too clever to the very end ever to confess. She drew herself up and she said that she would not remain to be humiliated by a ledger and a child, and she turned to go, and it was Lord Cassius, her own son, who stopped her. Grey, careful Cassius, who had built the first wall to protect her, and who had spent the whole long afternoon making the cold arithmetic of which side of the falling wall he wished to stand on. He stepped into her path not roughly, almost gently, and he said low, so that only those nearest heard it, "Mother, it is over. Do not make me the man who followed you down. I have a life yet to live in this house, and so does Verena, and it cannot be lived in the shadow of this. Let it end here, please." And whatever passed between them in that look, it took the fight out of her more surely than the king had, because it was her own son telling her the coat had come all the way off. The king's judgment, when he gave it, was not loud. He had no need of loudness. He did not name it treason in open court, for the sake of the house and the innocent children who bore Morwenna's name, and I understood the mercy in that, and did not admire it any the less. But he stripped her household to the walls. Mistress Holly's was dismissed that hour and handed to the magistrates, and the day book given into the keeping of the king's own private office, answerable to no consort ever again. Peveril Sconce, for his full and complete confession, was dismissed and charged but spared the harshest penalty, on the king's word that a used tool is not the hand. And the queen consort Morwenna was removed from all office and influence within the household, no household of her own, no aides, no ladies, no book, no reach, and sent to a distant royal residence in the north to live out her days in a comfortable and complete irrelevance, which for a woman like her was a harsher sentence than any cell. She would keep her title and her comfort and her name. She would never again be within 100 miles of the machinery of the crown. The weather system she had built over 11 years was dismantled in an afternoon, and the woman who had built it was sent to a place where there was no weather left to work. "You wished my son diminished," the king said to her, the only words he spoke to her directly at the very end, and there was more sorrow than anger in them. "You have spent a winter and a household and a marriage to make him look unfit, and in the end the only person you diminished is yourself, and the only person you proved fit for the crown is the one you attacked. Go north, Morwenna. There is nothing left for you here to spoil." And she went. The northern estates were settled that same week, and settled well. I mention it because it was, in a way, the truest vindication of the whole business. Not the sentence, not the naming, but the thing the scheme had been built to prevent. The Crown Prince Rowan went back into his mother's music room, and he took the last call of the negotiation with the door shut and the light honest, and no one stood at that door but a guardsman who was there to guard it, and he answered the estate manager's final proposal with the full and generous hand he had always meant to answer it with. The tenants kept their water and their tenancies for another generation. 10,000 families were spared, and never knew, most of them never know to this day, how close a hidden recorder in a coat had come to turning the heir who saved them into the villain who was said to despise them. That is the way of it in a palace. The greatest wrongs are the ones prevented, and the prevented wrong leaves no monument. Only the people who would have suffered, going on with their lives, never knowing what did not happen to them. Rowan was not diminished. He was, if anything, made. The winter that was meant to unfit him for the crown, instead, showed the whole house exactly what he was, a man who stayed decent under a hidden attack, who did not close the corridor door on a hard truth even when a comfortable lie was held open for him, who sent for his father rather than manage the thing quietly to his own advantage. The whispers about his tiredness died that winter and never came back. A man is not made by the absence of enemies. He is made by what he is when the enemy is inside the walls, and Rowan had been, when it counted, exactly what a king should be. As for the guardsmen, I will tell you what became of Corwin Vale, because it is the part I am gladdest to tell. The king offered him advancement. Of course he did. A man does not watch a guardsman hold the door of his house against a scheme like that and let him go back to a corridor without a word. And Corwin, I was there, I heard it, Corwin thanked his majesty and asked if it pleased the king to be allowed to keep his post. The west corridor, the music room door. "It is a good door to guard, your majesty," he said, "and I have got the measure of it now." The king looked at him a long moment, the way he had looked at the child, with that recognition of one plain, honest thing meeting another, and he granted it. Corwin was given the standing and the trust and the quiet advancement in rank that his service earned, but he kept his post, and he stood it for another 20 years, and I do not think there was ever a safer door in the kingdom than the one Corwin Vale had got the measure of. But the king did one thing more, and it is the thing I want to leave you with, because it is the true ending of this story, which was never really about a smashed telephone or a disgraced queen at all. The king held a small ceremony, not a grand one, no crowds, no cameras, only the family and the household and the guard of the East Watch. And in it he honored the person who had truly saved his house that winter, and it was not the guardsman, and it was not the crown prince, and it was not the king himself. It was a 9-year-old girl with gray eyes and a stubborn chin who had noticed a man standing in the wrong place, and had told the one guard she trusted, and had done the hardest thing a watcher can do, which is to keep watching in silence when every part of her wanted to cry out, and who had, in the end, cried out at exactly the right moment, and produced a written record that a ledger confirmed 11 times over. He gave her no medal, for she was too young for the house's medals. Instead, he gave her a small silver whistle on a chain, the kind a sentry carries, and he told her, in front of everyone, that she was made an honorary sentinel of the House of Harrowgate, the youngest in its history, and that the whistle was hers to blow if ever again she saw a thing that was wrong and needed a guard, and that a guard would come, always, at any hour, for as long as she lived. And he fastened the chain around her neck with his own hands, and Malin stood very straight and did not cry, because a sentinel does not cry on duty, and she looked across the room to where Corwin Vale stood at attention in his place. And Corwin, who was not permitted to move, who was a statue again, who had eyes forward and would not so much as glance aside for a queen. Corwin looked back at the small sentinel of the house, and for exactly 1 second. In front of the king and the whole assembled house, he He smiled. It was the only time in 20 years of service that I ever saw him break his composure at his post. He was never disciplined for it. I was the sergeant who would have had to file it, and I looked the other way, and I have never once regretted it. That is the whole of the story, and I have told it plain because plain is how it happened. The palace kept its quiet again after that winter, smooth on the surface, and you would learn nothing from the smoothness. You never do. But I know what is under it now, and it comforts me in my old age more than I can say. Under the smooth quiet of that house, there is a 9-year-old girl grown now into a woman, who still notices things, who still watches when watching is hard, who still carries, I am told, a small tarnished silver whistle on a chain that she has never once had to blow, because the house learned, that winter, to guard the smallest voice in its walls the way that voice had guarded it. The danger always arrives dressed as a courtesy. It carries a folder, or a tray, or a friendly little device that fits inside a palm, and the only thing that has ever truly stopped it in all my 31 years is not the tallest guard or the highest wall. It is a pair of watchful eyes that no one thought worth watching, and the discipline to wait, and the courage to speak, and one good guardsman standing at a door he has got the measure of ready, when the courtesy at last shows its teeth, to move.